There is a photograph taken on February 17, 2009. In it, a man stands on the steps of a private jet wearing a cream linen suit, sunglasses pushed up on his forehead, grinning at someone off camera. He looks untouchable. He looks like a man who has never lost a thing in his life. That photograph was taken 11 days before federal agents chased him down a Virginia highway and put him in handcuffs on the side of the road.
His name was Alan Stanford, and for 20 years he had convinced the world that he was the most successful banker in the Caribbean. He was not a banker, he was a thief, and by the time anyone caught him, he had stolen $7.2 billion. Alan Russell Stanford was born on March 24, 1950, in Mexia, Texas, a flat, forgettable town of 12,000 people where the biggest industry was a state psychiatric hospital. He grew up in a family that talked about money constantly and had very little of it. His grandfather had run a small insurance business, and Stanford clung to that legacy like a life raft. He idolized the idea of a self-made man. He wanted to be one. He just didn't want to do the work that required. He bounced through his 20s without much direction. A stint at Baylor University, a failed fitness equipment business in Waco that went bankrupt in 1984, real estate ventures that went nowhere in a collapsing Texas oil economy. By his mid-30s, Alan Stanford was exactly the kind of man he had always feared becoming: broke, obscure, ordinary. But Stanford had one gift that was genuinely extraordinary. He could walk into a room and make every person in it feel like they were the most important human being alive, charisma like a weapon, and he was about to find the perfect target for it. In 1985, Stanford took what remained of a small inheritance from his grandfather, roughly $13,000, and moved to Montserrat, a tiny British territory in the Eastern Caribbean. He opened a bank. Not a real bank exactly, a shell, a structure designed to take advantage of offshore banking laws that were, at the time, catastrophically weak. The island had essentially no financial regulation, no serious auditors, no one asking hard questions. Stanford had found his hunting ground. By 1990, he had moved operations to Antigua, a slightly larger island with even friendlier government officials. He named his operation Stanford International Bank. He built a sleek headquarters on a hill overlooking the capital, St. John S. He paid for a cricket stadium. He donated to local politicians. He essentially purchased legitimacy, one sponsorship at a time. The Prime Minister of Antigua, Lester Bird, became a personal friend. Stanford was awarded Antiguan citizenship. Then he was knighted. Sir Alan Stanford, the self-made Texas boy, was now being driven around a Caribbean island in a motorcade. Here is what Stanford International Bank actually sold: certificates of deposit, CDs, the most boring financial product in existence. You give us your money, he told clients, and we guarantee you returns of 8, 9, sometimes 10% annually. Guaranteed, safe, unlike those volatile Wall Street products. His pitch was elegant in its simplicity. While the stock market crashed and burned, your money sat in a vault in Antigua, growing quietly, safely. The salespeople called it the Stanford Advantage. 15,000 clients across the United States, Venezuela, Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico believed them. 15,000 people who were mostly retired teachers, nurses, small business owners. People who could not afford to lose what they were handing over. The problem was simple and total. The money was not sitting in a vault in Antigua, growing safely. Stanford International Bank's investment portfolio, the one supposedly generating those guaranteed returns, was almost entirely fiction. The CDs were a Ponzi scheme. New investor money paid old investor returns. The actual assets of the bank were a fraction of what Stanford claimed. An internal audit conducted years later found that the bank's real investment portfolio, the one actually containing assets, held maybe $500 million against $7.2 billion in claimed deposits. The rest existed only in documents that Stanford's finance director, James M. Davis, fabricated on a laptop in Antigua. James Davis had been Stanford's college roommate at Baylor. He was shy, bookish, deeply uncomfortable with confrontation. He was also the man who cooked every book, forged every audit, and signed his name to 20 years of lies. He would later tell investigators that Stanford had approached him in the late 1980s and simply told him what needed to happen. Davis said he went along with it because he didn't know how to say no. That might be the saddest sentence in this entire story. Now, here is what makes this case genuinely disturbing. The SEC knew, not the full scale of it, not immediately. But as early as 1997, an SEC examination flagged Stanford's CDs as likely fraudulent. The examiner, a young analyst named Julie Pruitt, submitted an internal report stating that Stanford International Bank appeared to be a Ponzi scheme. Her supervisors reviewed it, and then they filed it away.
They opened 4 separate investigations between 1997 and 2005. They closed every single one without bringing charges. Later, an SEC Inspector General's investigation found that the Fort Worth office, the office responsible for Stanford, had been actively discouraged from pursuing large, complex fraud cases because they were too resource-intensive. Alan Stanford continued operating for 12 more years after that first report. Meanwhile, Stanford got bigger, louder, more untouchable. He moved his United States operations to Houston, opening a gleaming brokerage on Post Oak Boulevard. He sponsored a $20 million 2020 cricket tournament in the Caribbean, helicoptering onto the field in Antigua with a glass case containing $20 million in cash for the winner. The BBC covered it. ESPN covered it. He appeared on CNBC. He gave interviews about financial responsibility. He talked about protecting ordinary investors from Wall Street excess with the absolute confidence of a man who has never once questioned himself. In 2008, Forbes estimated his net worth at $2.2 billion and listed him among the wealthiest Americans. Not one word of it was real. The collapse did not come from a whistleblower. It did not come from a regulator finally paying attention. It came from the global financial crisis of 2008. When Lehman Brothers fell in September of that year, investors everywhere panicked. They started calling Stanford's offices. They wanted their money back. And in a Ponzi scheme, too many people wanting their money back at the same time is a death sentence. Redemption requests surged. The scheme could not absorb them. By late 2008, the whole structure was shaking. On February 10, 2009, the SEC finally acted. They filed a civil fraud complaint in federal court in Dallas. 3 days later, on February 13th, FBI agents arrived at the Stanford Financial Group headquarters on Post Oak Boulevard in Houston. They found computers still running, coffee still warm in the break room, and no Alan Stanford. He had already left the country. For 11 days, Stanford was a fugitive, not a particularly skillful one. He was hiding at his girlfriend's house in Fredericksburg, Virginia, a small town in the Shenandoah Valley. On February 27, 2009, FBI agents located him and attempted to serve him with civil papers on a road called Brock Road, just outside town. Stanford initially refused to accept the documents. He stood on the road in the cold Virginia winter and argued with federal agents about paperwork protocol. They served him anyway. He was arrested on criminal charges months later, on June 18, 2009, in a neighborhood near the Justice Department building in Washington, D.C. The victims began to surface immediately. Genevieve Williams Comrie, a 67-year-old retired schoolteacher from Baton Rouge, had put $340,000 into Stanford CDs. Her entire retirement gone. Luis Dominguez, a Venezuelan investor, had placed $800,000 into the bank on behalf of his family. Gone.
The Stanford Victims Coalition, eventually representing over 18,000 individual investors, documented losses in 113 countries. In Venezuela alone, over 4,000 investors lost a combined $2 billion. Many of them were working-class families who had been specifically targeted by Stanford's Spanish-language marketing campaign in South America. They had been told, in their own language, that this was safe, that this was the option for people who couldn't afford to lose. The trial of Alan Stanford began on January 23, 2012, in federal court in Houston. Stanford arrived each day wearing dark suits that looked slightly too large for him. He had lost weight in prison. He had also been severely beaten by another inmate in September 2009, sustaining a traumatic brain injury that his lawyers argued left him unable to assist in his own defense. The judge, David Hittner, was unmoved. The trial lasted 6 weeks.
The jury deliberated for 3 days. On March 6, 2012, they returned a verdict on all 13 counts. Guilty, mail fraud, wire fraud, obstruction, money laundering, investment advisor fraud, 13 counts, all guilty. On June 14, 2012, Judge Hittner sentenced Alan Stanford to 110 years in federal prison. Stanford, now 62 years old, showed no visible reaction. He was transferred to a federal prison in Coleman, Florida, where he remains today, inmate number 35017-183. He will die in that prison. James Davis, the college roommate who had spent 20 years forging the documents, cooperated with prosecutors. He received 6 years. He served 4. He was released in 2015 and returned to his family in Texas. The Antiguan government, which had spent 2 decades taking Stanford's money and looking away, faced almost no consequences. The regulatory official who had nominally overseen Stanford International Bank, Leroy King, was eventually extradited to the United States in 2019, a full decade after the fraud collapsed. He pleaded guilty in 2021. He had accepted $100,000 in bribes from Stanford, personally, in cash, to ensure that no serious questions were ever asked. He was sentenced to 10 years. The SEC's failure became one of the most scrutinized regulatory collapses in American history, second only to the simultaneous catastrophe of the Madoff case. Congress held hearings. The Inspector General's report was scathing. Julie Pruitt, the analyst who had called it a Ponzi scheme in 1997, testified before the Senate. She had been right. 12 years before the collapse, she had been exactly right, and no one had listened. She said quietly into the Senate microphone that she had thought about those investors a great deal over the years. That was all she said about it. The receiver appointed to recover assets for victims, Ralph Janvey, spent years chasing Stanford's money across the globe. By 2022, he had recovered approximately $500 million of the $7.2 billion stolen, less than 7 cents on the dollar. Most victims received nothing close to whole. Many received nothing at all. The Stanford Victims Coalition continues to operate. Their website still lists open cases. The names on it are mostly ordinary, a lot of Garcias and Williamses and Nguyens. Teachers, retirees. A woman who had saved for 40 years and lost everything in the time it takes to sign a form. Alan Stanford, from his prison cell, has continued to maintain his innocence. He has filed appeals. He has granted jailhouse interviews claiming the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that the investments were real, that the government destroyed his bank by publicly accusing it before giving him a chance to respond. He says this with the same absolute confidence he used to sell CDs to 15,000 people who trusted him. The voice has not changed, only the room he is speaking from. What stays with you, after you study this case long enough, is not the money. $7 billion is a number too large to feel.
What stays with you is the photograph. The one from February 17th, 2009. The cream linen suit, the private jet stairs, the grin. Because in that photograph, Alan Stanford already knew. The SEC had filed 2 days earlier. The FBI was coming. The whole structure was already falling. And he is grinning.
Some people are not afraid of getting caught because they never truly believe they will be. That belief, held long enough, starts to look a lot like innocence. It isn't. It never was.